I want to be straight with you. For most of 3 decades, I grew tomatoes the way my father did and the way every American gardener does, wide rows, bags of 10, 10, 10, a weak plant or two that gave me a basket of fruit if I was lucky. Then one evening I walked over to Daniel's place and saw 4 plants in a 4-foot square loaded so heavy the stakes were bending. He told me that single patch feeds him and Ruth through the whole winter, over 200 pounds, and here's the part that stung. The reason most of us can't do this isn't talent, it's that we were taught backwards. Stay with me, because the deepest layer of his method is something he does underground, weeks before a single seed goes in. So let me tell you who buried this, because it didn't vanish by accident. After the Second World War, this country had a problem. We'd built enormous plants to make ammonium nitrate for munitions. And when the war ended in 1945, those plants got converted almost overnight to making nitrogen fertilizer. All that capacity needed a market. And right alongside it, the land-grant universities and their extension services started teaching the American home gardener a brand new way to grow. Here's the part that took me years to understand. The extension bulletins of the 1950s standardized tomato spacing at roughly 3 feet apart in 4-foot rows wide, spread out, and that wasn't for your yield. That spacing was designed so a tractor could drive between the rows, so a machine could cultivate and harvest, and so you'd need bag after bag of 10, 10, 10 to feed all that empty ground. It was a layout built to sell equipment and sell fertilizer, not to grow the most food in the smallest space. So here's what it costs folks like us. Follow that advice and you get a basket or 2 of tomatoes per plant. You buy fertilizer every single spring to do it, and you never once question it because it's the only method anybody ever showed you. Now, Daniel and the old order Amish here in Lancaster County never adopted that spacing, and the reason is simple. They never mechanized. There was no tractor to make room for. So the older, denser pre-war method, the one that fed a family off a tiny patch, just stayed alive on their farms while it quietly disappeared from every American advice column and seed packet. That's why you won't find this in the standard gardening advice. It got optimized out, replaced by a method that sold something. Daniel's method sells nothing, and that's exactly why it survived where almost nobody was looking. All right, let's keep going because I want to show you exactly what he does. The first thing you see when you stand over Daniel's tomato patch is how small it is. 4 plants, a 4-foot square, smaller than a card table, and those 4 plants give him over 200 pounds of tomatoes that carry him and Ruth straight through the winter. For 30 years, I'd have told you that's impossible. I had the same square footage giving me a fraction of that. The first move is the one nobody taught me, and it's the one that stung the most when I finally understood it. When Daniel sets a transplant, he doesn't put it in the ground at the same depth it sat in the pot. He buries 2/3 of that stem. Only the top third stays above ground. Before he plants it, he strips off all the lower leaves along that stem, lays the plant down almost sideways into a deep hole, and covers it up so just the leafy crown is showing. For 30 years, I planted shallow. I'd dig a little hole the size of the root ball, drop the plant in at pot depth, and pat it down. That's what the bulletins show. That's what my father did. And that's the first step. The extension advice quietly dropped because once you understand why Daniel buries that stem, the whole thing starts to come apart. Here's the mechanism. A tomato is one of the few plants that will grow roots out of its stem anywhere that stem touches soil. They're called adventitious roots, bury 2/3 of the stem, and every inch of it that's now underground sends out new roots. You don't get one root system. You get a root system several times the size of what a shallow plant ever builds. And a tomato's yield is governed by its roots. More roots, more water, more nutrients, more fruit. That's it. So the deep plant isn't a trick, it's the foundation. While my shallow planted tomato was sitting on a little knot of roots the size of a fist, Daniel's plant was running a root mass 3 or 4 times bigger straight down into the ground. And that's the kind of thing that never made it into the standard advice because a deep planted single vine doesn't need the row spacing a tractor does. The second piece is pruning, and this is where most folks flinch. Daniel grows each of those 4 plants as a single vertical stem, one stem. A tomato naturally wants to branch. In the joint where a leaf meets the main stem, it pushes out a new shoot called a sucker. And if you let every sucker grow, that one plant turns into a sprawling bush with a dozen competing stems and a jungle of leaves. Daniel removes every single sucker. Every week he walks that patch and pinches them out at the leaf stem joint while they're small. What that does is force all the plant's energy up one stem and into fruit instead of spending it on building more and more foliage. A sprawling bush makes leaves. A single prune stem makes tomatoes. And this is the answer to the question I couldn't figure out for years. How do four plants this close together not choke each other out? Because they're not competing sideways. A bush competes horizontally. It fights its neighbor for elbow room, but Daniel's plants are deep-rooted and single-stemmed, so they compete downward into the soil and upward into the air, not sideways into each other. The crowding works because the whole system is built vertically and down, not out. That's the part that was taught backwards. We were taught to space wide and let plants bush out, which wastes the vertical space entirely and burns the plant's energy on leaves. Daniel does the opposite of both. Plant deep, prune to one stem, and go up. Now here's where it gets interesting, because going up only works if you've got something to go up on. Daniel grows tall, indeterminate heirloom varieties, the old beefsteak types that never stop growing. A determinate tomato, the kind you find on most garden center tables, now grows to a set height and quits. An indeterminate just keeps climbing all season long. He stakes them 6 and 7 feet high, and by August those plants are towering over him, loaded with fruit from knee height to over his head. That's the second reason the wide row method fails you. It was built around shorter, machine-friendly plants spread out flat. Daniel's plants use the one dimension the bulletins ignored entirely, which is straight up. And then there's the feeding. A plant working this hard, this densely, needs to eat all season, and Daniel doesn't reach for a bag. Ruth makes what she calls her liquid gold, a compost tea brewed right from their pile, and every 10 to 14 days those tomatoes get a deep drink of it. It's a steady, gentle, biological feeding, not a salt shock. I wouldn't argue with Ruth about anything, but especially not about gardening, and that compost tea is one of the reasons those four plants never run out of steam from June to October. Put it all together. A single one of those deep-rooted, single-stem, well-fed, indeterminate vines will give 40 to 60 pounds of fruit over a long Lancaster County season. Multiply that by 4 plants in the 4-foot square, and you're past 200 pounds. That's the whole math. There's no miracle in it. It's deep roots, one stem, vertical growth, and constant feeding working together. And not one piece of it sells anything, which is exactly why it got left out. There's a final layer, and it's a discipline most people never get to because they quit before they understand the crowding. The spacing looks like a paradox. Everything we're taught says crowded plants get weak and diseased, and they would if you grew them as bushes. But because Daniel's plants are vertical and deep, the crowding becomes a strength. The patch shades its own soil, holds its own moisture, and supports its own stakes. The density is the point. 2 things keep that dense planting healthy. First, in late summer when the season's starting to turn, Daniel pinches out the very top growing tip of each vine. He stops it from climbing any higher, and what that does is tell the plant the season's ending. So instead of pushing new growth, it pours everything into ripening the fruit it's already carrying. Every tomato on the vine finishes faster and fuller. Second, and this one matters even more in a tight planting, he never wets the foliage. Not once. All the water goes deep at the root, never on the leaves. Most tomato disease in a dense patch spreads on wet leaves, splashing from plant to plant. Keep the leaves dry and water down deep where those buried roots are living, and you take the disease pressure right out of the equation. He's been growing tomatoes on that same plot for over 50 years. 4 plants packed into a square, and they stay clean because of those 2 small disciplines. I learned to read it on my morning walks. I do the same thing Daniel does now, 10 minutes every morning with a cup of coffee, just looking, not working. He told me once, "You can't tend what you don't see, Bill," and standing over a patch like that, you start to notice the things the bulletins never mentioned, because the people who wrote them weren't trying to teach you to grow 200 pounds in a square. They were trying to teach you to farm the way a machine farms, spread thin and fed from a bag. That's the method, top to bottom. But there's a deeper layer under all of it, something Daniel does underground weeks before any of this goes in, and I want to make sure you get it. But before I show you that final underground piece, I want to pause for just a second, because what I've shared today is one piece of what Daniel taught me. The reason 4 plants in a square can carry that kind of load comes down to the soil underneath them, and that's the whole subject of Chapter 4 of my book, The 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. It's called Building Pest-Proof Soil, and it walks through Daniel's pile never stops composting and why nutrient-dense ground grows strong, productive plants instead of weak ones. If you're tired of the chemical treadmill and the bagged fertilizer, and you want a real system instead of a single tip, it's $17 at backyardbuildbooks.com. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time finding it. I'll be right here. Now, let me come back to why a method this good vanished from American advice in the first place. Here's the thing. The intensive Amish way of growing tomatoes sells nothing. There's no bag of 10-10-10 to buy. There's no wide row equipment to finance. There are no branded inputs, no specialty sprays, no annual product to keep you coming back. It runs on hand labor, a compost pile, and a hole in the ground. When the hole post-war farm economy was built around selling you something every spring. A method that asked you to buy nothing had no place to attach itself. Nobody profits when you feed your plants from a pile you built for free. And there's a second reason just as important. This method cannot be mechanized. Every plant needs a hand-dug pit and hand pruning, sucker by sucker, all season long. That's fine on Daniel's small plot, where 4 plants feed 2 people through winter. It's impossible on a 1,000-acre operation. So the extension science optimized for the things a machine could do. Wide spacing a tractor could drive between. Fast salt-fed growth a harvester could time. The dense method got left off the page, not because it didn't work, but because it didn't scale. Now, I'll be straight with you about the obvious objection. Maybe the Amish just have better soil or more time on their hands. I've heard both, but Daniel built that soil with the same compost anyone can make, from manure and kitchen scraps and leaves. He didn't inherit magic dirt, he made it, and the method is less work per pound of food, not more. 4 well-tended plants in a square beat a sprawling row every time for a fraction of the watering and the picking. Daniel put it plainly to me once, I don't feed my plants, Bill, I feed the ground, and the ground does the rest. He never mechanized, so nobody ever came along to correct the method off his farm. It survived intact while it disappeared from everyone else's. And here's what that cost you and me: 30 years of buying fertilizer every spring for a basket of tomatoes per plant, when the same 4 square feet could have fed us straight through the cold months. That's the price of being taught backwards. Now that underground layer I promised you, this is the step almost no American gardener does, because it happens before there's a single thing to see above the soil. 4 to 6 weeks before transplant day. For Daniel, that's late March into early April on our Zone 6B ground. And he digs each planting hole deep, not 6 inches, 18 to 24 inches down. Then he builds what I think of as a buried biomass pit right in the bottom of it. A layer of aged horse manure, a handful of crushed eggshells, a handful of bone meal, a buried fish head or fish scraps right down in the dark, and a load of green matter on top of that. Then he backfills 8 to 10 inches of plain soil over the whole thing and walks away, weeks before he plants anything. By the time those tomatoes go in, that buried mass is alive and decomposing. It's doing 2 things at once. It's warming that cold spring soil from below, giving the roots a head start the air temperature can't, and it's become a slow-release feeding reservoir buried right where the plant is headed. Remember the deep transplanting from earlier, the stem buried 2/3 down, throwing roots the whole length? Those roots grow straight down all season and meet the pit. The buried roots and the buried feed find each other underground. That's the deepest layer of the whole system, and it's the one the standard advice never mentions, because nobody thinks to look at a hole with nothing in it yet. Before I let you go, I want to come back to what those 4 plants actually give you. 200 pounds of tomatoes does you no good in August if it rots by October. You have to put it by. That's exactly what Ruth has spent a lifetime doing, and it's chapter 10 of the book, Ruth's Root Cellar and Putting By. It's the grow it, protect it, store it side of the same tradition, the part that turns 1 square patch into food that feeds Daniel and Ruth through the whole winter, just like the hook promised. If you respect this kind of handed-down wisdom and you want the complete system rather than one loose tip, it's all there, $17 at backyardbillbooks.com. If you're on the big screen, this is a good moment to pull out your phone and scan the code. No hurry at all. I'll still be here when you've got it pulled up. So that's the whole method, top to bottom. 4 plants in a 4-foot square, transplanted deep, pruned to a single stem, run up 6 or 7 feet of stake, fed with compost tea and rooted into a buried pit you dig weeks before anything goes in. 200 pounds in 4 square feet, the pre-mechanization method the extension bulletins quietly erased. Now you know what the standard advice left out. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, stick around, because Daniel grows 100 pounds of potatoes in a patch smaller than my kitchen table, and he hasn't owned a rototiller in 50 years. And there's a reason for both. Daniel and Ruth are still doing all of this right now, a quarter mile from where I'm sitting. Try it on a single 4x4 square this season. Drop a note in the comments and let me know how it goes. Last summer, I pulled just under 80 pounds of potatoes out of a single structure that took up less space than a card table. 4 square feet, that's it. Meanwhile, my neighbor dedicated an entire 30-foot row to his potato patch and harvested maybe 40 pounds. More space, more work, less food. And when I told him where I learned the method, he didn't believe me at first. But this approach has been used by Amish families for generations. And when you understand the biology behind why it works, you'll wonder why anyone still plants potatoes in rows. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how to build and plant a vertical potato tower the way many Amish gardeners do it, step by step, with every measurement and timing detail you need. And stay with me to the end because I'll share a stripped down version of this method using nothing but straw that you can set up in about 20 minutes. Here's my confession. For about 2 decades, I planted potatoes the same way every spring. Dig a trench, drop in seed potatoes, cover them up, hill them once or twice, and hope for the best. And the results were fine. Not great, not terrible. Maybe a pound or 2 per plant if things went well. But I was dedicating a huge section of my garden to potatoes every year, never really questioning whether that was the best use of that space. Then I spent some time around an Amish community in Holmes County, Ohio, and saw something that completely reset my thinking. A man had these wire cylinders about 2 feet across and 3 feet tall, stuffed with straw, sitting right next to his barn. When harvest time came, he tipped one over and potatoes just came rolling out of the straw in every direction from one cylinder. I stood there watching and counting, and I stopped counting after 50. That's when I started asking questions. The principle behind this method comes from something deeply practical in Amish life. These are large families. 8, 10, 12 people at a table is not unusual. And they're feeding everyone primarily from their own land. They don't have the luxury of wasting space. Every square foot of garden needs to pull its weight. So over generations, they developed methods that grow vertically instead of horizontally, stacking production upward to multiply what a small footprint can produce. It's not a gardening trick. It's a survival strategy born out of genuine necessity. And the reason it works comes down to basic potato biology that most of us were never taught. Here's what you need to understand. When you bury a potato stem, the buried section produces lateral shoots called stolons. Each stolon tip swells into a new tuber. That's a new potato. In a conventional garden, you hill your potatoes once or twice, and that's all the buried stem length you get, which means a limited number of stolons and a limited number of tubers. But when you grow vertically, you keep burying the stem over and over as the plant grows upward. More buried stem means more stolons, which means more potatoes. You're essentially giving the plant permission to produce tubers along the entire length of its stem instead of just the bottom few inches. That's the science, and that's why this method can dramatically outproduce row planting in a fraction of the space. Now let me show you exactly how to do it. Before you build anything, you need to start with the right seed potatoes, and this is the step that makes or breaks the entire method. Not all potatoes are created equal when it comes to vertical growing. Potatoes come in 2 types. Determinate varieties produce all their tubers in one layer near the base of the plant, regardless of how much you hill them. These include most red skin varieties and some early season types like Yukon Gold. If you use these in a tower, you'll get the same harvest you would have gotten in the ground. The hilling does nothing extra. What you need are indeterminate varieties. These are the ones that keep producing new stolons and tubers along buried stem length as the plant grows taller. The best choices are Russet Burbank, German Butterball, Canella Russet, Elba, and Kennebec. These are the varieties that Amish gardeners, in my experience, tend to favor for vertical growing because they respond to continuous hilling by producing tubers at multiple levels throughout the tower. Get certified seed potatoes from a garden center or seed supplier. Don't use grocery store potatoes. They're often treated with a sprout inhibitor that will sabotage your results. About 2 to 3 days before planting, cut your seed potatoes into pieces roughly the size of an egg, making sure each piece has at least 2 eyes. Let the cut surfaces dry and callus over in a cool, shaded spot. This prevents rotting once they're in the moist growing environment. For a single tower, you'll need about 4 to 5 pounds of seed potatoes, which will give you enough pieces for 3 to 4 layers as you build upward. Now let's build the structure. There are several ways to do this, and I've tried most of them. I'll give you the method that's given me the best results, which is also the one I've seen most often in Amish gardens. Take a length of welded wire fencing, the type with 2 by 4 inch openings, and cut a piece about 12.5 feet long. Form it into a cylinder about 4 feet in diameter and secure the ends together with wire ties or short lengths of baling wire. That gives you a footprint of roughly 4 square feet, when you account for the circular shape. Set this cylinder on level ground in a spot that gets at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. Full sun is essential. Potatoes will not produce well in shade. Line the inside of the bottom 12 inches of the cylinder with straw, pressing it against the wire walls to create a nest. This keeps the growing medium from falling through the gaps. Some Amish gardeners line the whole interior with burlap or landscape fabric, but straw works perfectly and is what I've seen used most often. If you prefer a container approach instead of a wire tower, a 55-gallon drum with drainage holes drilled in the bottom and sides works well. So do large trash cans, stacked tires, or even a wooden frame built from 4 pallets wired together in a square. The principle is the same regardless of the structure. You need walls that go up at least 3 feet, drainage so water doesn't pool, and enough width for 4 to 5 seed potato pieces per layer. Here's where the growing begins. Fill the bottom of your tower with a 6-inch layer of a 50-50 mix of compost and straw. Some Amish gardeners use a mix of compost, garden soil, and straw in roughly equal parts. The key is that it needs to be loose, well-draining, and rich in organic matter. Place 4 to 5 seed potato pieces on top of this layer, evenly spaced with the eyes facing upward. Cover them with another 4 to 6 inches of the same compost and straw mix. Water thoroughly until the material is evenly moist but not waterlogged. That's your starting layer. The tower should be filled to roughly 12 inches at this point. Now you wait. Within 1 to 2 weeks, depending on soil temperature, you'll see green shoots emerging from the surface. This is where most conventional gardening stops. You'd hill once, maybe twice, and then let the plant do its thing. But the Amish method keeps going, and this next step is where the yield multiplication happens. Every time those green shoots grow to about 8 to 10 inches above the current surface level, you add another layer. Pile on 4 to 6 inches of your compost and straw, mix around the stems, leaving just the top 3 to 4 inches of foliage exposed above the new layer. You're burying most of the stem each time. This triggers the plant to produce new stolons along all that newly buried stem length. Each one of those stolons becomes a potential potato. You'll repeat this hilling cycle 3 to 4 times over the course of the growing season, gradually filling the tower from bottom to top. Each layer you add is another level of potential tuber production. By the time you've finished hilling, your tower should be about 3 feet tall and packed with layers of developing potatoes from bottom to top. Here's the timing for reference. In most of zones 5 through 7, you'll plant your tower 2 to 3 weeks after your last frost date, when the soil temperature reaches about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The first hilling happens roughly 3 weeks after the shoots emerge. After that, you'll hill again every 2 to 3 weeks as the stems reach that 8 to 10 inch threshold. The whole process from planting to final hilling takes about 10 to 12 weeks. If you're in zones 3 or 4, plant a bit later and expect a slightly compressed schedule. Zones 8 and 9, you can start earlier and may get an extra hilling cycle. Now, what I'm showing you today is just one piece of a much bigger picture. The Amish don't do anything in isolation. Every technique connects to a whole system, and that system is what makes the difference between a garden that struggles and a garden that practically takes care of itself. I spent years learning how it all fits together, and I've put everything into a step-by-step guide called the 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. It's got the complete 5 defense layers, the companion planting charts, the 4-bed crop rotation, all of it laid out day by day, so you're never guessing what to do next. If you want to go deeper than what we can cover in one video, there are 2 easy ways to get it. You can click the link right down there in the description below this video, or if you're watching this on your TV or your computer, just grab your phone, open up the camera, and point it at the QR code on screen right now. It'll take you straight to the guide. No searching, no typing anything in. All right, let's keep going. Watering is the single biggest factor in how many pounds you pull out of that tower, and it's where most people go wrong. A vertical tower dries out faster than an in-ground bed because the straw and compost mix is exposed to air on all sides through the wire mesh. In a conventional garden row, the surrounding earth holds moisture. In a tower, you don't have that buffer. You need to water deeply and consistently. Here's the rule I follow. Stick your finger into the growing mix about 3 inches deep. If it feels dry at that depth, water thoroughly until you see moisture coming through the straw at the bottom of the tower. During hot summer stretches, that might mean watering every other day. During cooler or rainy periods, twice a week is usually enough. The key is consistency. Potatoes that go through cycles of dry and wet produce knobby, misshapen tubers and reduced yields. Steady, even moisture produces smooth, full-size potatoes. For feeding, the compost in your growing mix provides most of what the plants need. But if you want to boost production, a side dressing of balanced organic fertilizer or a drench of compost tea every 3 to 4 weeks during the active growing phase helps. Don't overdo nitrogen though. Too much nitrogen produces beautiful leafy tops and disappointing tubers underneath. You want balanced nutrition, not a growth explosion above ground. Now here's how you know when to stop hilling and when to harvest. Once your potato plants flower, that's a signal that tuber formation is well underway. At this point, stop adding layers. Let the plants put their energy into swelling the tubers rather than producing new stem growth. From flowering to harvest is typically another 4 to 6 weeks. The signal that your potatoes are ready is when the vines begin to yellow and die back naturally. Don't rush this. Those final weeks are when the tubers put on their last weight and the skins toughen up for storage. When harvest day arrives, this is the fun part. If you used a wire tower, simply cut the wire ties, unwrap the fencing, and let the whole column of straw and compost collapse. Then just start sifting through the layers with your hands. Potatoes will be sitting at every level from the bottom of the pile all the way up. It's like a treasure hunt. I do this with my grandkids now, and they talk about it for weeks. Let me be straight with you about yield expectations, because I think honesty matters more than hype. The title says 100 pounds, and that is achievable. I've spoken with Amish gardeners who consistently hit that number with mature russet Burbank towers in good growing years. But my own best harvest from a single tower has been just under 80 pounds, and my first year I pulled about 45. The variables that affect your yield include the variety you choose, how consistently you water, the quality of your compost, how much sun the tower gets, and how long your growing season is. Realistic first-year expectation is 40 to 60 pounds from a single 4-square-foot tower. That is still an extraordinary yield for the space. Improve your technique each year and those numbers climb. But I'd rather you start with honest expectations and be pleasantly surprised than feel like the method failed because you didn't hit 100 on your first try. Now let me share some patterns I see in conventional potato growing and how this vertical approach handles things differently. The first pattern is dedicating huge garden space to potatoes. A traditional potato row might run 20 or 30 feet long and produce 40 to 50 pounds if everything goes well. That's a lot of prime garden real estate for one crop. The vertical method produces equal or greater yields from 4 square feet. The rest of that space is now free for other crops. That efficiency is exactly why Amish families adopted this approach. When you're feeding a dozen people, you can't afford to waste ground. The second pattern is hilling once or twice and calling it done. Most of us hill our potatoes when the stems are about 6 inches tall. Maybe do it once more a couple weeks later and then stop. But every inch of stem you leave exposed above the soil is a missed opportunity for stolen production. The Amish method hills aggressively and repeatedly, bearing stems up to 4 times over the growing season. That's 4 levels of tuber production instead of 1 or 2. The third pattern is using whatever potato variety is available. This is the silent killer of tower projects. I've seen people build beautiful towers, follow every step correctly, and harvest a disappointing 10 to 15 pounds because they planted a determinate variety. Red Norland, Yukon Gold, and most early season varieties simply do not respond to deep hilling by producing additional tuber layers. They set all their potatoes at one depth, regardless of how tall the tower is. You must use indeterminate varieties for this method to work. Russet Burbank, Kennebec, German Butterball, Canella Russet, or Elba. This one details the difference between a 40-pound harvest and a 10-pound disappointment. The fourth pattern is inconsistent watering. In the ground, potatoes have the surrounding soil mass to buffer moisture fluctuations. In a tower, the growing medium is exposed on all sides and dries from the outside in. I lost a significant portion of my first tower harvest because I treated it like an in-ground bed and only watered when I remembered. Towers need more frequent, more consistent watering than row-planted potatoes. Check moisture every 2 days during warm weather and and water deeply when that 3-inch finger test comes back dry. Now, here's something I want to share for anyone who wants to try the simplest possible version of this method. No wire fencing, no containers, no construction at all, just straw. I watched an Amish gardener do this in Lancaster County, and it's the most stripped-down version of vertical potato growing I've ever seen. He laid 4 seed potato pieces directly on the ground in a 2-foot by 2-foot square. Then he covered them with about 8 inches of loose straw. That's the entire starting setup. No structure, no soil, no compost, just potatoes on dirt buried in straw. When the shoots came up through the straw about 8 to 10 inches, he added another thick layer of straw on top, covering most of the green growth. He repeated this 3 more times over the season, building a mound of straw roughly 2.5 feet tall by the time he was done. The straw keeps the developing tubers in complete darkness, holds moisture surprisingly well, and decomposes slowly enough to maintain its structure through the season. At harvest, he just pulled the straw apart, and the potatoes were sitting right there, clean, dry, and undamaged. No digging, no sifting through soil, just potatoes nested in straw at every layer. His yield from that one mound was somewhere around 50 pounds. Not the highest possible number, but the labor involved was almost nothing. No building, no materials beyond straw, and a harvest that took 5 minutes of pulling straw apart. I've done this straw-only method alongside my wire tower for comparison, and the tower does outproduce it, probably because the compost mix provides more nutrients. But the straw-only version is so easy and so forgiving that it's where I tell every beginner to start. If you have a patch of ground, a few seed potatoes, and access to straw, you can have 50 pounds of potatoes in about 14 weeks with almost no effort. And if you add a handful of balanced organic fertilizer to each straw layer as you build up, you'll close the gap with the tower method significantly. That's what I've learned from Amish potato growers about working vertically instead of horizontally. The whole approach comes down to understanding one simple piece of biology. Buried stems make more potatoes. Everything else, the tower, the straw, the repeated hilling, is just a delivery system for that one principle. Whether you build a wire tower, fill a barrel, or just pile straw on the ground, you're giving the plant more stem length to work with, and it rewards you with more food from less space. If any of this changed how you're planning to grow potatoes next season, let me know in the comments. Now, what I've shared with you today is a real piece of the puzzle, but it's still just one piece. If you're tired of fighting the same battles every season, if you want a garden that actually works with you instead of against you, then I'd really encourage you to check out the guide I put together. It's called the 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol, and it's everything I've learned from my Amish neighbors over the last 3 decades, organized into a simple day-by-day plan you can start this season. It covers the full 5 defense layers to build a garden that defends itself from the soil up. It's got the complete 4-bed crop rotation system that stops disease and pests before they ever get a foothold, and it includes the companion planting field guide, so you know exactly what to grow next to what and why. Now, there are 2 easy ways to grab it. The first way is to click the link in the description right below this video. Just scroll down a little and you'll see it. The second way, if you're watching on a television or a computer screen, is to take out your phone, open up your camera like you're going to take a picture, and hold it up to the QR code you see on screen right now. A little link will pop up at the top of your phone screen. Just tap that, and it'll bring you right to the guide. No typing, no searching. Either way works. I think it's the best investment you can make in your garden this year.